and welcome to the 1%ers Performance Podcast, coming to you from Combermary and Gadigal country in Australia. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and we acknowledge the First Nations people of these lands. This is the podcast exploring how small changes make a big impact. I'm Mario Buchs, and together with my co-host Tim Buxton, we'll discover the unseen edges of peak performance to help athletes, teams and leaders unlock their exponential growth. And now, it's time to dive in and find the 1% that changes everything.
Mario, welcome to my humble abode here on the Gold Coast.
Thank you so much for having me, Tim.
Mate, how fun is this?
It's the best.
Here we are in my little studio in the garage, and we are perched on my little couch, which we shifted in here so that we could, at least in a more somewhat comfortable setting, be with you today. If you're tuning in on Spotify or YouTube, watching the video, we are so glad that you've joined us for another episode, and we are going to record two parts of I think a really cracking little episode duo for you. So Mario, as we kind of dig into another episode of the 1%ers, I want to kind of start with a little story, as you've kind of been coaching me through a bit of my own running and ultra running preparations ahead of a big challenge coming up in the latter part of the year. And you set for me a 5 kilometer pace run. What I noticed when I went back and had a look at the metrics, I guess, that you can look into Strava and have a look, or actually in Final Surge as well, which is the application and software that you use with all of your running and athletes that you coach. I noticed that I was really good. My times for the start were really good. My times for the finish were great, but those kind of 3 minutes in between, it was a lot of fluctuation. In fact, a real lot for improvement. And I can quite honestly say I was actually really feeling it more in that middle section. And I guess this is no surprise to most people probably listening that, you know, you've got the start, the finish, and then you've got that all important middle section, kind of like a plane that has got the takeoff. It's got the landing, but in between you've got that cruise control, that middle section, that all important middle section where I realized I suck at. Two, it's probably one of the areas that you are, I think, an expert at. So I really want to get into your mind about not only what that's like from a running perspective, but I think it applies in a lot of facets and areas of our lives, especially if we're trying to pull off a project or perform a particular task. So what are your insights around those kind of three zones, and what is your kind of take on how do we get that 1%, that exponential growth by just honing in on that drive, that middle section?
Yeah, Tim, that's a great question. I think with a lot of things like you already mentioned, we have to start something to get to a finish. But with everything in life, there's also a middle bit, you know. We related a little bit to running now. I think the longer the race would get, the bigger that middle part will get, the more important it gets to know exactly how to operate in that middle part, you know, that drive part. Yeah. And I think it's good to split that up into 3 sections. And that start where you use a bit of motivation, perhaps, you know, that's something that we need, the kick. We're motivated. It comes from the head. You know, it's like, yeah, it's in there. The mind says, yeah, I want to do this, independent of it's now running or if it's a new project, we just start this. And many people are good at starting. That's a positive, you know. But then we get into a mode where, we can't see the finish yet. Or how do we deal with this middle part, this drive part? So the drive part, then I would compare that with, it comes a little bit deeper from within because that needs to be bigger. So not that the head's smaller than anything else, but I think the mind runs out of energy because it uses up a lot of energy, whereas the drive that comes from within, out of our gut, I think our body That's where the weight is to pull us through or push us through something like this.
You said something right there I want to catch on. You said the mind or the head uses a lot of energy. What do you mean by that?
So it's one of, in terms of using a lot of our energy intake, that the head, because the brain is working all the time, more or less in overtime all the time. This is where a lot of energy goes through. The other problem is if we then pile things on top, like motivation that keeps us going, we drain even more energy. But we have other systems that can operate. And that's just my belief. I'm a big believer in drive. I say that a lot. It just feels good to have that drive, and it's like unstoppable, and you need to churn through this. We can call it whatever we want, run all day mode, so we call that rad.
Yep.
Or you click into the diesel engine, and if it's a project that works, it's one of those things where you just need to keep checking in. Okay, check in with your teams, check in with your partner in life. If it's a relationship thing where we want to go on holiday or something, whatever it is, private life or at work, and then we need to kind of get to a point where we can see the finish line. But that's something we can talk about later.
Yeah.
There's a transition as well, right? From this mind, the motivation. We run out of kind of energy, then we need to get into this drive modus, this diesel engine, and it just needs to, because we've got other things to deal with then, check in with people, like I said, or making sure we drink and eat if it's a running event or an endurance event. There's a lot of things we need to do, little milestones that we have to set up front, and that then also helps us to get through this big middle part. That can be huge. That can be a week, that middle part. If someone's running a 200 mile or a 250 mile, that middle part goes from Monday through to Friday. The start was easy. We've started, we've gone out.
Absolutely.
And everybody goes out to hard. In a race, in life, they
You
want to
see it all the time. People there's that nervous energy, right?
Correct.
And then if you're not careful, you'll go from nervous energy to depleting that all important energy that's required in that drive phase of whatever it is you're setting out to achieve. It's pretty, for those listening, if you're listening to this, chances are you don't struggle with starting things. And that's why we're really not, I guess, in this short episode, don't really want to spend a lot of time of like, you're probably one of the people that you don't need convincing to get started, to have a crack. You've got plenty of ideas. You're easily motivated. The struggle generally comes in when the motivation and the passion and starts to wane, and you've got to find, like you said, without the finish in sight, which, once I see the finish, suddenly, all these other kinds of endorphins and things tend to kick in. But how do we go? The real challenge here for especially high performing individuals is not starting. It's not the drive, the motivation. It is learning to transition into pace mode, or like we call, you said before, rad mode when it comes to running. Run all day. You mentioned other systems and processes can then take over. And I love that analogy because, whether you're a project manager, you're thinking about, look, if I just have a system of habits, of check-ins, if I have a system of disciplines and I can get into that mode, which for someone like me is very difficult. Mm-hmm. Someone like you, an engineer, in order for you to complete highly complicated long-term projects, you need to have, and with multiple people and departments you're overseeing, you need to have these all-important systems and processes in place. Talk a bit more about what that transition, how do we get to rad mode? Like what is important? What's the kind of mindset you need to shift into in that rad mode transition, that run all day, that it's just unconscious, automatic? There isn't, like me, in that those 3 kilometers in the middle. It's such a huge fluctuation because I'm like striving for some kind of motivation to keep going because it hurts, instead of being able to zone in and focus on, no, stay in the moment. What's the process? What's the thing I need to think about? What do you think is critical in that transition and in that drive phase?
Yeah, I look at it in there's 2 examples here. There's the running part, where you need to ease into a longer race, let's say, and and have a plan anyway. That comes at the beginning. But the problem with a lot of things is even when we start a project at work, we want to get as soon as possible. We want to get running, right?
Mm-hmm.
Literally get the project underway. That means we involve too many people in the beginning. That's a big mistake people make. Do not pick 17 people if you only need 3. Bring people in as you need them to get this thing started,
Right.
get them off to do the work. So while then people are off doing their bit, you check in periodically, which is fine. But then don't, it doesn't have to be all the time. And then when you run, the transition happens when you say, okay, now I'm comfortable, now I'm running. Then you check into your body. Is there any hotspots going on, right? Hotspots in running can be anything that becomes a blister later on, the hot heel or anything like that. Is the pack sitting right? I mean, we're talking a little bit ultra marathon running here or endurance cycling. Things have to be kind of comfortable. And at our normal day job at work, it's exactly the same. Is there a hotspot in the beginning? Deal with it. Someone is not clear. Usually, if people are not cooperating, that means they don't understand. That means it's our responsibility to explain it again and say, hey, this is what I'm expecting. This is what we do. Is there an issue? Do you understand everything? Usually people say, look, I'm not quite clear. And I didn't want to ask in front of others and stuff like that. So don't throw everything onto yourself immediately to make yourself look good, because if you're running a 100-mile event, the first 10 miles, nobody cares, right?
Yep.
But it's then the next 80 where you need to churn through things. And then you've got that last 10-mile bit, and in comparison to where you're at on your 3-kilometer middle part, so the transition happens when you have to get comfortable and you have to trust the process, which will then go into play. Because in the beginning, you're not in a process mode. You're at a start line. You're throwing 14 spreadsheets in the air, or at the start line of an ultra marathon, you're figuring out, okay, how fast should I go, and so on. And because you've tapered for 3 weeks, you've eaten plenty the night before, you're just anxious, you're nervous. It's usually cool at the beginning. Independent where you are, normally races can be cool. That means you want to get moving. And for a guy like me, it takes ages to get moving. I'm sometimes 20, 25, 30 Ks. I'm still not comfortable. Takes a bit longer, but then once you transition into this, now I'm checking in. Once you've checked in every 15 minutes, then you have to get into those nice little habits like drinking every 15 minutes, eating every 40 minutes, or whatever you plan to do.
Yeah.
The plan has to be set. Every project has to have a plan. That's set in the beginning.
Of course, right? Yeah. We're taking for advantage of the fact that this isn't just some random idea that you've just set out to. But when it's time to start, we know that's not the time to negotiate and listen and have this conversation. A friend of mine who I run with regularly, he decides the night before. He doesn't give his little voice the chance to have a negotiation when the temptation to hit the snooze button. Like, the decision's made the night before, he's going. That's great because, you eliminate the voices and the decision making to get started. You just need to, honestly, most of the time, it's just start. It's that the hardest part is in that phase is just actually taking the first step. You hear it all the time. However, what you're saying here is in phase drives, the second phase that relies on a lot more systems and processes. The mind, right, is like that burst of energy that a rocket just takes to get off the ground. It sheds that pretty quickly. And then there's a lot more components that are now available to get this project or this to get you through this all-important critical phase of the drive phase. And I love that idea of this is the time to not shut down the voices. It's actually the time to be very open-minded and curious. This is the time to say, let me run through everything here. How's my legs feeling? How's my foreman on the ground feeling? Let me do all the check things through everything and be curious about everything, not judging. There's a difference between coming to conclusions too quickly. But I think I love that idea of let's just go through everything and realize there's a lot here that I can now draw on. And I'm someone who can be distracted by anything. But the beautiful thing of allowing yourself to be distracted by whatever might be happening is you get clues of, hang on, the weather's a lot hotter, or all of these different things that might require you to lean into different areas at different points in time. That is what I heard you saying. And is there anything you'd kind of, I guess, add to that as we kind of, zone in on this all-important drive phase? It's not motivation. Motivation won't get you through. It will quite often be your drive.
It's more powerful, isn't it? This drive. So point number one, it's more powerful. It's less emotional. Up here, we're really emotional.
Yeah, the motivation, the mind.
Oh, it's just emotional.
Energy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's easy to
the
motivate.
Passion.
Correct. The passion. It all happens up here. Of course.
The ideas, the
nervous system.
Excitement.
Correct. But it still happens in the body, absolutely. But the drive thing is just really much more powerful, I mean, it's easy to be motivated in the evening until the 4 a.m. alarm clock goes off. Right?
Yeah.
It's easy. Motivated, you go to bed. Yes, I'm pumped. So if that
you got your shoes out, things ready to go.
And then the alarm goes off. Then what do we do? Then it also has to become a little bit of a habit. It's just what I do. It's not who I am. It's what
Habits,
I do.
Unconscious check-ins, automations.
Very, very important, Yeah, don't let emotions take over, because there's always going to be an excuse. Or if the boss says, tomorrow I want this project started, you're motivating then until it's 8 a.m. and you're in the office, and then you want to start this project. It's exactly the same thing. You just have to start somewhere, one foot in front of the other. That's very simple. Then once you've got rolling, you get into that phase, wherever that may be. That could be in 5 minutes. That could be in a week, like I said. Then we move forward. The best thing, not moving, is kind of standing still in my book,
Well, that's another important thing, right? You constantly got to go, and this is where you can use distraction even as an advantage, not as a negative. Someone like me, ADHD diagnosed, distraction is this terrible thing apparently, but really it can actually be, you know what, it's going to help me go from one thing to the next and keep moving and not getting too stuck. And I think the attitude is the key thing here, not getting into a judgmental phase, but a real, let's dig into that. Let's be curious, because we're going to have to dig in if we're going to make it through this. And that's, I guess, more of a mentality mindset in that phase, isn't it?
Correct. Drive mindset, open mindset. I mean, we talk about mindset a lot. I talk about mindset a lot. It's just, for me, it's so important. If you've got this closed mindset, it gets really difficult to open up and make new things and make changes. And, you get into these, there's good habits and bad habits, of course. And this is not a podcast about habits. And, there's a lot of smarter people than me that talk about habits and how they evolve and how they get made and done and created. But I think in the end of the day, you have to have something like simple. If you get in the car, the first thing you do is put the belt on. It's simple.
Yeah.
Because you don't even think about it. And that's exactly what has to happen when we get started. And then once we're in that drive modus, we focus again. So if we start the driving, we get to the motorway. Once we're on the motorway, we go into diesel engine mode. We're going to run all day mode, even if it's a long trip, going on holiday with your family, Same thing. And then, of course, at some stage, we have to start thinking of transition 2, using an Ironman triathlon terminology. Transition 2 is then going into the run part. In the triathlon, in our part, we're trying to see the finish line, seeing it through. A lot of people can start something. A lot of people can get into this drive mode, but then it'll take someone really special to finish the whole thing off, because it's not done while you're in the drive mode.
Right. There is a lot to consider, and we will actually dig into that in our next episode. The importance of getting through that drive mode, which you've perfectly, I think, given us a great example, some practical tools to put into place, but to then make the next transition. That is something I love, getting to that phase. And when I can get there, or when it feels like it's time to switch on, that is when the better part of me kicks in. Unfortunately, it's right at the end, so I've got a lot of work to do to get there. But we will spend a little bit of time digging into the next episode. Thanks, Mario, for kind of opening that up for us. And I think there's a lot we can take away.
Always a pleasure, Tim. Thanks a lot. Thanks for starting us off.
Thanks for tuning in to the One Percenters podcast. That's a wrap for another episode. And we're proud to be recording from Australia on Kombumerri and Gadigal country. And we honour the traditions and knowledge of the First Nations people and pay our respects to elders, past and present. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. We want to hear from you, your questions or topics you would like us to cover, and you can easily do that in the Spotify app. And for those of you that are ready to discover your peak performance edge today, just head on over to our website. That is top.coach. That's TOPP.coach. And start unlocking your unlimited potential with us today. We would love to work with you. And that's it for now. Until next time, what are you waiting for?